Okay, excellent. Okay, so whoever here is new, what we're doing today, oh boy, I hope I have that. Um, hold on, let me see if I have any of this folder. I always have an extra folder. I'm not going to do the Jews in the New World today. The one I'm doing is I'm finishing up. We had started last time Jews in 18th century liberalism. So I don't know anything. I don't know. I have to see if I have extras. Just hold on. If not, you can go to the office. Andrea will run them off for you. I think I gave out my last one. I'm so sorry. Yeah. So you know what? Tell if you go to the office and tell Andrea, you don't mind, tell her like the liberalism, that one. Yeah, she saves them all. It was tell her was the one from like a week or two ago. And to run off, I don't know how many people still need copies. Like so three, make I don't know, make five more. Okay, excellent. So we've been doing the Jews in the 18th century, and we're primarily now doing the Jews of Europe. What was their status, and then we'll go for a bit to the New World. All right, that's why that new handout. So there's another handout there, but I'm not sure if I'm getting to that quite today or not. So Halavai, if Shalom is willing to give a lecture, I mean I could do it. I mean I know this material pretty well, but I would like him to just trace. He's like an expert in what's called the Western Sephardim. Mostly when you think of Sephardim, you probably think of those from North Africa or those from the Middle East. But there were some Portuguese Jews, not Spanish, Portuguese Jews who ended up in Holland, and then they came to England, and then they came to the Americas. All right, but they are Portuguese Jews. And Shalom, it doesn't make it to give the lecture. I'll give it to you. I mean, as I said, he's told me there's so much, with me. Just so you know, my son Shalom, he's the Rabbi Bevis Mark Synagogue in London. It is the oldest synagogue in London. It's actually in the city of London. It's like a 10-minute walk from his house in Shul to the Tower of London. So if you could just visualize, I don't know if you've been to London or not. And it used to be a big center of where the Jews came. They settled there for the East End of London. And but most of them have moved out, but there's still a core. And those people who either that they can trace their descent from Spanish, Portuguese Jews, or as I say, mostly it's Portuguese Jews, or some people just because they love the ritual, in his shul. It's very interesting and different tunes. And when I was there once for last year, I was there for Shavuos. I brought my own machzor. I'm sorry, I needed my Ashkenazi thing. But like Shabbos, I'll follow, the regular siddur. Anyhow, so we were talking about what we had begun to talk about last time. And again, if you want to follow along, I'm not going to necessarily read everything, but give a synopsis. So it's the one that says here, Jews and 18th century liberalism. So again, she's going to run them off. Super. This is the age of reason, the age of enlightenment. It's going to be impacting now a Western Europe and Western European Jewry, but not those Jews in Eastern Europe. That will not come to them until actually even the middle of the 19th century, and it's called there the Haskalah. But this is a different track here for those Jews living in the Western European countries. They too were imbued with this idea that they too are deserving of equal rights, of civil rights, of becoming part and parcel of the communities. They've been living for hundreds of years, if not longer, even though they were expelled on occasion. But, they felt very much a part of whoever they were living with. They were German Jews or French Jews. We're going to emphasize those two countries in particular. And the Italian Jews. And they too want to be treated just like everybody else. So I had started off with Mendelssohn, because Mendelssohn, you can view him as a precursor of, modern Jewry, or you could do it, with a very critical air, that he introduced changes which then led the Jews, unfortunately, to, many of them ended up intermarrying with non-Jews. Some converted to Christianity, but I think his intentions were good and pure. He just wanted the Jews to speak the German language. If you're living in Germany, you have to speak the language, not Yiddish. And that this would be a way of breaking down the ghetto walls, and you'll be more acceptable to the general population, and they will welcome you. That wasn't quite true, but this was his mindset, because he was a member of the intelligentsia of Germany. He was in Berlin, and he was certainly welcome among that tiny group of people. So he thought, well, he's going to widen the circle, but it's not so much that the oh my God, we're talking about the 18th century, 18th to 1700s. So a long time, before we come to the 20th century. So a small core of Jews then do follow him. He translates the Chumash into German, and he figured this was a way how the Jews in the ghetto would learn the language, and then through that, they could become a bit more acceptable in the general population. These are, how many did she make? Oh my God. All right. Well, we got plenty here. Everybody's got a copy. Many late people come. Okay. Thank you. So we started off by just talking about the fact that there were we're talking a small number of what you could call liberal Christians for various reasons. They were willing to accept Jews in their midst. Some were because of economic reasons, that this would, increase the economic wealth of Germany. So to accept them, more on a par with ourselves. Some politically, just because they thought, this is a time period where people, not everybody's getting equal rights yet, but there's this movement, like all men are created equal. Everybody should receive civil rights wherever they might live. And then there are always those on an intellectual level, who wanted to accept the Jews. But again, they're talking about a very tiny part of this German population. Most people were anti-Semitic. That term anti-Semitism is from the 19th century, but we can use it to describe people from an earlier generation. And the thought, let me just finish and then I'll be happy to take a question. And their way of welcoming in Jews, and I'm sure even in their minds was only the ones who would dress properly, who would speak a beautiful German, but it's that the Jews had to change themselves. Not that they are going to be changing their mindset and welcoming in, everybody who lives within the borders of Germany, but these outsiders, these very different people, so it's partially anti-religion. Most of the Jews and most of the civilians in Germany, depending where you live, were either Protestant or Catholic, and the Jews were always different from everybody else, from our prayer, how we conduct ourselves, etc., etc. So prejudice is still rampant, in Germany, although there's this slight beginning of a little crack of opening the doors to accept Jews as part of society. Yes. Ah, yes, sure. Mm. Yeah, they didn't want them. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well, that's why I said there were certain, for economic reasons, that they were willing to accept Jews, in their midst. But these are Jews who have been living here, I'm telling you, for hundreds of years, if not over 1,000 years. Um, but now is it just slowly, there's this awakening of the consciousness of, I'm talking about the non-Jews, then maybe yes, it is okay to accept these Jews in our midst, and we need to treat them with on an equal footing, that they should be granted the same rights as anybody else. Now, this is not a kind of democracy in Germany. It's not. It's just a group. I told you, more of intellectuals, who are willing, to accept, the Jews who live among them. But I'm sure the ones they're viewing, like Mendelssohn, were themselves people of intelligentsia. So if the other Jews will follow in his footsteps, so we will be now more accepting. But that's, again, we're talking about a very of the general population. Okay, then we turned a bit to England, and so I'm certain this. Um, but as I say, I've learned a lot from him. And the Jews are first can openly practice their religion under the reign of Cromwell. And we're talking about the uh, uh, it's middle of, really, it starts in that 17th century, and then will increase going into the 18th century. And Cromwell himself was a Puritan, and he was part of a group of Englishmen who were totally opposed to the idea of a monarchy. So the prior king was Charles I. He was beheaded. He didn't get along with Parliament at all, and they hated him. Then Cromwell became the head of government. Uh, Upon his death, I'm trying to remember, I think it was a short period, his son might have taken over the reins of government, but there were more people who wanted to bring back a monarch. So Charles II, who had been in exile, he was the son of Charles I, he's brought back, and this is called, the Glorious Revolution, whatever, and they bring him back. But just the interplay, the fact that he's a Puritan, who were the first to come to live in America, are the Puritans. And it's all happening around the same time period. Because when did those first individuals come on the Mayflowers? In the year 1620. And when are the first Jews? They're all Jews living more underhanded. They're not openly practicing their Judaism, but during the reign of Cromwell in 1654, they do. They start, they are Portuguese Jews. They are Jews who left Portugal somewheres, in the starting in the 1500s, but now perhaps more in the 1600s. The Inquisition is still in effect in Portugal, and they want out. They're proud of their Jewish heritage, and they want to live openly as Jews. And that's why they are migrating to. Some came initially to Holland, and then from Holland they come to England, and from these countries they come to the Americas. So just so you can sort of see, this broader picture. The only thing that the Jews in England, I mean, they're living freely. They're part and parcel in the economy of the country. There were merchants. That area where they lived in London was close to the Thames River, so there's lots of commerce, that was going on. But the Jews could never fill an official role in the government because you had to give an oath of loyalty, and it was a Christian, and they wouldn't change it, for the Jews. And that was the one, big difference in their lives there. On page 2, I talked about that there was a prime minister around this time period. His name is Hallam, and he actually wanted to grant, equal rights to the Jews, and they could become part of the government there. And he actually convinced Parliament, to pass this bill that Jews would be granted total equality, but too many people were opposed to it, and so after several months of just And we're back. But in the middle of the 19th century, they will finally be granted, and they don't have to take an oath like on a Christian Bible. That's going to be done. I think we had started about Austria, which is also a German-speaking country, and that it will become the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So in 1782, there actually was an edict of toleration. It's kind of interesting because the Jews in Vienna had been expelled, you know, and most of the Jews of Austria lived in Vienna. There were very few in the other towns. And this is Joseph II, so he's considered to be a very forward, very tolerant individual. Again, it says this decree, this edict of toleration, you know, gave the Jews more freedom of movement. They could never, you know, you could never go from one place to another, you know, without being taxed heavily for doing this, or restrictions on your life. And very much like in Germany, right? Two countries are kind of together. And why was the reason given? Because the Jews are not sufficiently civilized. So we don't want this foreign element to think that they are as equal as we Austrian citizens. And eventually, after Joseph II passed away, again, he was a very tolerant individual. This edict, you know, that he had passed, you know, was done away with. Okay, now we're going to turn to France. France is really interesting. There were 3 areas in France where Jews had settled. Now, the original is that area close to Germany called Alsace-Lorraine, and you know, the borders change. Sometimes they're part of France, sometimes they're part of Germany, depends, you know, politically, what is going on. There were Jews already now living in Paris. It's interesting. They had been officially, you know, thrown out of France in the year 1394. But obviously, at a certain point, they started trickling back in. There was never a law passed on Jews are now allowed to reside in France. They just somehow found their way back. So, and this is the most interesting, that there were also Jews in the southwestern corner of France around Bordeaux, who and they were originally Portuguese Jews. I just want you to visualize, you know, those in Alsace-Lorraine are really more like German Jews, Ashkenaz. You know, Paris is a mixture, you know, of both these elements. But in southwestern, right, the quarter closer to that Spanish border. I don't know if you can visualize. There's Portugal and Spain sort of going, whatever, they managed to escape over the borders, and that's where they settled. And the production of chocolate cake comes from that part of the world. You know, the Jews were very much involved. Introduced years ago, until England, you know, started ruling in India, there were coffee shops every place. You know, in Holland, in England, there were coffee shops. You wanted to go and get together with friends. Not so much women, like men would do this. You know, politicians. You know, you would go to the coffee shop. It's only with this very close relationship between India and we're talking about the 19th century that tea became the major drink in England. And they have a big dispute there. Should you put the milk in first and then add the tea? Or should you put tea in first and then add your milk? That's how they drink their tea. They add milk to it. So I guess obviously in a kosher home, you know, before artificial milk, they just, you know, plain tea. But that most of British people will add milk to their tea. Now we know that France is this hotbed of, you know, intellectualism, the ideas of granting men equal rights within it. Men, notice it's always men. We weren't including women. Okay, it was just men. And you know, and then the thing is, well, should the Jews be included? Are we not men? I mean, in generic terms, are we not human beings? You know, well, no, we in their mind, we really won't. We're certainly not equal, you know, to a native Frenchman. It's so ironic. So they say native. I mean, so again, these Jews were living there for a good, you know, 1,000 Also they were expelled officially, at a certain point, mostly in that 14th century. But I mean, from the time of Charlemagne, there have been Jews living in France. Um, but again, there's this change. These great philosophers, Rousseau and Voltaire, others. They come from France. They're the ones. Well, those are the ones who actually who they plus like John Locke, from England. These are the ones who are going to influence the Americans. You know, that we want independence. We want equal rights. We don't want some other foreign country telling us what to do. Maybe Great Britain. And and the Jews, again, I'm sure again it was minority of intellectual Jews. They hear, this cry, this demand that everybody should be granted equal civil rights in the country. And boy, does this appeal to them. So, they are part and parcel. Again, I don't think the regular population, they're just trying to exist, and get by day to day. But about a certain element, yes, oh my God, would not this be wonderful that we would be treated like all other French or other English or Americans? Um, and uh, and this goes all the way until the French Revolution. Uh, we're not going to do him today, but boy, where do we come to Napoleon here to see what he does? So that cry for liberté, equality, fraternité, this was, boy, did this appeal to people. Again, I would say that those people who demanded, the breaking down of the walls of the Bastille, which was a prison, these were people who they wanted that there should be equal rights to everybody, for the peasants. Everybody should be treated on the same level and basis. But you'll see. But what are we to do with those Jews? are, are they one of us? Can they be included? So let's see. We're now on starting to page 3. Look, even in Germany, that small group of intellectuals, they want to welcome in the Jews. But majority of the people, they're so full of prejudice. Again, it's coming from the well, it depends, from the church. In France, Germany is, the northern part is Protestant, but the southern part is Catholic. In France, it's the opposite. Most of the people there are Catholic, but those, again, more in the southern area, are Protestants. These are the Huguenots. So I don't know if you've ever done this. My husband and I, over 2 summers, we sort of went up and down the Hudson River. There's, you can't imagine, there are so many fascinating places to tour and visit there. And there we went, I'm not sure which town it was, but there's an area there where the Huguenots had settled, and you can tour. They still, some of the buildings are left there. Interestingly, they even though they were we never accepted into French society, but they themselves, they had slaves. And it was just accepted in those days. I mean, right now I'm doing Dafyomi, and it's talking about having slaves, and like and the way they refer though to the slaves, right? And property, your property. I don't know. It's so against modern way of looking at it. Yeah, they did. They did. Any case, so now we're in France. Demand for it. There's great fervor in the country until obviously, they arrest Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette, and then the guillotine and chop people's heads off left and right. But again, are the Jews to be accepted as equally as Christian members of society? All right, so I told you about the 3 areas where Jews lived primarily. Alsace-Lorraine, those are Ashkenazi Jews. We have those Portuguese Sephardim. Shalom always refers to, they're called Western Sephardim, right? Because they're very different. They're very formal in the way they daven. They're not like those regular Sephardim. I mean, Shalom went to the Sephardic minion that's in BRS when he came to visit, he came back to free. I mean, it's like no, they in his show, they wear top hats and it's very quiet. Nobody talks, and very yes, very formal, atmosphere. They back now to each other. It's really, I mean, nothing that we would see so much in the U.S., but not at all like what you would call that as black. The Eastern, these are very, very different. And then I told you that they are the ones who will be settling in that southwestern corner of France. Okay, so if you look at the bottom part of that page 3, I mean, I'm going to talk to you about it, but where the information is. The Bastille, was overrun, and there were actually hardly any prisoners left in there when it happened, but whatever, and that's in 1789, which is a famous no, but we had our revolution starting in 1776. You know, we were certainly much more forward, thinking. And everybody who lived in the U.S. then could become a citizen. You weren't discriminated. Maybe initially, when the colonies were first being established, there would have been a question whether, listen, they were more anti-Catholic than they were anti-Jew. They didn't like the Catholics one iota. And that's why, like when John F. Kennedy became president, it was like, whoa, unprecedented that a Catholic became a president of the United States. Because we Americans, most of the people, even though there's a large Catholic population, most are Protestant. Right? And again, they very much I think Maryland was the only colony that was actually founded for Catholics refuge. But in other places, they would have been like on the fringe of society. They accepted. Anyways, this National Assembly is now called to order in France post 1789, post the French Revolution. And again, are the Jews to be accepted among us as equals or not? Okay. And this has always been the case. We still are viewed like that by so many people. We're not like the general population, right? Well, whether one is an observant Christian or not, but the Jew, we're always looked upon as a foreign element, in the country. So now they're discussing this in this National Assembly in France. And again, it harks back to the church treated and the Jews in their midst, the rhetoric, their writing. I don't know if you've ever read parts of the New Testament. I once gave a course on anti-Semitism. Ever looked at the New Testament? Boy, I was horrified. For certain of the things how they treat the Jews. Well, it's all based because we killed their God. That's what it's based on. So even if they became not so observant as time went on, and French Revolution was again anti-monarchy and anti-church, but still those Jews. So we really accept them in our midst. On the other hand, they were being influenced, by the great philosophers of the time who talked about that there should be equal rights granted to everybody within, that these are natural rights that everybody living in a place, of course, obviously not to slaves. And what about those tricky Jews? Should they be accepted, equally among us? All right. So let me see. I think I'm turning out the page. Ooh, okay. So then, of course, there's always a group of people who want to hark back to those days of the monarchy, and they were so proud. I mean, those Louis had been around for centuries, and so they're called reactionaries, people who want to bring back the old world order. So they certainly had no desire for the Jews, to be accepted among themselves. This I found so interesting. It's in that first paragraph. It says the representatives of Alsace-Lorraine, especially those in the city of Strasbourg. By the way, there are 2 towns called Strasbourg. one is in Austria, Mozart, I think of Mozart, and the other is in France, in Alsace. And these people at this National Assembly, these were the people who were the most opposed. You have to understand those Alsace-Lorraine Jews, the German, Jews, they would be the most foreign to the normal Frenchman. But those from the Portuguese Jewish community, these Western Spartan, they had integrated themselves more into general society, and they were more acceptable. But these Ashkenazi Jews, they're speaking Yiddish. The others have learned, they're speaking French. I mean, probably their dress was somewhat, different from the general population, and they didn't mingle socially at all, right, with what would have been the Christian population. So those people living, again, the non-Jews living in Alsace-Lorraine were definitely opposed to accepting Jews as equal. If the Jews hated Christians, it wasn't brought up in that. Maybe not to look upon them so nicely because where they treated us, but that's a different thing. But there's this one statesman, his name was Count Mirabeau, and it was a clergyman, Abbe Gregoire. So they were in favor of the granting of equal rights to the Jews. He said, and if you dislike the Jews, and you dislike their foreignness and you're being so different, well, you created that, by separating from society. So of course they clung to one another and customs, and you're the guilty one. If you accept them with open arms, so of course they will blend into general society and they'll become as French as anybody else. Well, this debate goes on, and they can't make up their minds. Should we accept the Jews? Should we not accept them? I thought this was interesting. I had read this with my sources. It says the same arguments were repeated. The reactionary was told the same anti-Jewish jokes. This was a serious discussion. How they were doing it. And as the months rolled by, of course, the Jews are becoming more and more anxious. And, are we going to be accepted as Frenchmen? Are we going to be granted the same rights as other people in this land? And now this is really sad, but now even the Jews, how they're representing themselves, there's going to be a division among the Jews. Remember I told you those original Portuguese Jews, these Western Spartans, they have blended themselves in to much greater extent into French society. And they want to make it clear to them that they've got nothing to do, with those Jews from Alsace-Lorraine, those Ashkenazi, they're foreign ways. They're speaking Yiddish. And again, the others are speaking French. I mean, they know Portuguese, like in a very old Siddur or Machzor, Portuguese Jews, you will find some Portuguese prayer. I know in Shalom still. But just like this, they're conducting their lives in French, and that's how they're speaking to their neighbors. That's how they're conducting business. It's always going to be in French. Of course, probably Portuguese, they call those Romance languages, and it's probably easier to adapt to French with Spanish. So then these, now, by the way, I could go a whole discussion just on Voltaire. Voltaire, who was this great proponent, right, of equal rights, etc., human rights, he really disliked Jews. He was a big anti-Semite. And so already it's, that third paragraph there, it says, even a quarter of a century before, 25 years prior to this National Assembly, that the Jews of Bordeaux had already been in communication with Voltaire to say, oh, we are not like those other Jews, those Jews of Alsace-Lorraine. We are very different. We are Frenchmen. This argument. They lay claim to pure-blooded descent from the tribe of Yehuda, whereas the Alsatian Jews, like other German Jews, the French and the German, where do they hate each other? And they were the offspring of the inferior 10 tribe. I mean, baloney. I don't know where they dug up this. you know, argument, but this is how they viewed themselves. Right? Yeah, exactly. No, and they wanted to show even that they are descendants, you know, from the kings of Israel, the great king, you know, a King David, you know, that they themselves are a royal one, so that they should be accepted like any other. Okay, and some people in that National Assembly thought that's a good idea. Like pivot one Jew against another. That's great. Right? And eventually they do admit Jews, but only the wealthy, or does money talk, right? And if you're money and you're contributing to the economy, okay, yes, we can treat you. But those poor Jews, you know, that they're, I don't know, their little shops, and, their money lending things, you know, no, you know, they cannot be accepted. Uh, Listen to this. Jews of the Bordeaux were granted French citizenship in 1790. So this is just like a year. Revolution is in 1789. Now this is 1790, and the National Assembly says, okay, well, those Jews right in southwestern France, they will get equal citizenship. And those poor Jews living in Alsace, right? They were just too different, too foreign, and they were not to be granted the same. Yeah, it's yeah, very okay. Now we're going to go into the reign of terror. You know, if you remember study history, and you know they kept on guillotining people left and right. I mean, this is how they viewed equal rights. You know, treating other human beings like that. Yeah, you know, again, this would it's against the reactionaries. You know, we have to remove from our midst anybody who's tainted with connections to the monarchy. You know, that's what they're going to get rid of. And they are anti-church. Well, but even now those Jews living in Paris, you'll see they have there are only 500 Jews living in Paris, you know, at this time, but they wanted to be treated, and they actually now will participate, you know, with the general masses, you know, in this fight, you know, against the reaction in this reign of terror. I mean, not such so complimentary that they weren't, you know, involved in that, but they so much wanted to be part and parcel of society. So of course they wouldn't have had sided with the reactionaries. So they, you know, sided with the revolutionaries. So that's, you know, who they looked up to. And they convinced the people living in Paris, yes, that in fact equal rights should be granted to anybody living, you know, in the country, except, well, obviously, especially in Paris. So here, since September 1791, 2 years after the outbreak of the revolution, all Jews, interesting, it's only 2 years, but look at these discussions. All Jews, whatever their origin, were admitted to French citizenship. I mean, how sad, you know, that there's still that anti-Semitism in France, because look at this, we're talking about over 200 years that, you know, we were granted rights. Yeah, yeah, whatever, it's just that. I like this thing because one of the revolutionaries came out with this statement. The Jews, conscious of the error of their ways, have felt the need for a fatherland. We have offered them ours. Yeah. But then we're going to see in the 19th century with the Dreyfus trial and then the rise of Zionism, and you know, it's. But keep in mind, at this time, the fervor of granting of equal rights to everybody living within the borders of a country, everybody is deserving of equal rights. This is there were 40,000 Jews living then in all of 500 in Paris. And because they were ecstatic, you know, that they are now going to be equal to every other country. They said some of them, you know, joined to serve in the National Guard. Others were in those citizen armies to defend the revolution. You know, I'm sure you've all, if you haven't read the book, but it would be gone to the play, like Les Miserables. You know, that's talking about, you know, when they set up the barricades and demanding rights. Um, but now there are a lot of extremists who are coming to the fore. Again, this will be that reign of terror. Um, and a lot of even the revolutionaries, they want to take this idea of granting of equal rights, let's take everybody on the same plane. So they decided to abolish all established religions. Again, it's primarily anti-church because they felt that they were part of that reactionary movement. Uh, the church had the Catholic Church, was called, I told you, because there weren't so many Protestants. They were more in the southern part of France. Um, they were all powerful. And I'm not quite sure how it is in France today, but many people still are very, very loyal to the Catholic Church. But here's this revolutionary group coming to the fore, and again, they're obviously against the Catholic Church and their teachings, because they back the monarchy. So you have to put their part and parcel with it. But now, what are we going to do with those Jews? I mean, there's synagogues and there's separate schools. So they want to abolish those as well. So we, even though we were fighting on the side of the revolution, but now they want to eradicate our religion as well. And obviously the churches, the synagogues, and schools like Jewish schools have been forced to close. I mean, we're going to see this is going to happen later for other reasons, though, in Tsarist Russia, where they want to interfere with the yeshivas. They, going to be closed. And so, like this, the Catholic and Jewish clergy were commanded to worship the goddess of reason. So it's obviously some Jews did, they abandoned their religion to they were so anxious to be part, French society. It said actually religion was then driven underground. That's always happened. Prejudice. And it makes me think of those conversos, right, in Spain and then in Portugal, who of course also to practice the religion secretly in their homes. But this whole, it's all part and parcel of that reign of terror, thing. It doesn't last very long, and then soon after we're going to have the rise of Napoleon. Right? But that would be a whole separate lecture. It's very interesting. I didn't see the movie. Anybody see the movie about Napoleon? I'd love to just rent it sometime. Watch it. And so the Jews see they can pass whatever things you want, but that old prejudice is still there. We are not accepted, and we can't become full members of society because we are different. We are different. I'll talk a little bit here about Holland. It says the French army. It's going to be the French army, particularly under Napoleon, as we'll learn, who spread these ideas of freedom to other countries. Holland already is a free country. I mean, when the Jews first go to settle there, again, starting in the 1500s, much more the 1600s. Actually, in that 17th century, they had a very rich life in Holland. They do have equal rights there. They're very much accepted into society. So, but now France is in an uproar. Should we back them? We'll see. So it says the French armies carried this slogan to other parts of Europe. We're not talking about Holland. We're going to talk about, going into France and Germany, actually Italy. That's the part we're talking about. So a lot of Jews weren't sure that they really wanted to be part and parcel. I mean, they were very proud Jews, and short time period, the revolution was turning against religion. So do we want to align ourselves with that? And there had already been granted religious freedom. That's why they went from Portugal and settled it for that reason. Holland had been ruled over by the Spanish king, but there was a revolution. It was thrown The Spanish king was thrown out, and it was a great uh, area of toleration. They didn't care if you that you were Jewish or you practiced, your religion differently. And again, they become Protestants. Uh, they obviously the Spanish people are Catholic, but the people in Holland are Protestant and Calvinists. Um, and so they were more than willing to open their country to the Jews, and also they had to bring economic, wealth and commerce and trade, to Holland, uh, so that they became very devoted to this House of Orange. The House of Orange is monarchy in Holland. It's not really all, anymore, but if you belong to that House of Orange, you're looked upon, with pride, again, because they granted religious freedom to anybody who wanted to settle in Poland. Um, Now, this is interesting. It says, devoted to the House of Orange, which had given them protection, right? They had welcomed these Jews in to settle, though, especially, we're talking about mostly Portuguese Jews, although eventually Ashkenazi Jews, actually, like the city of Amsterdam, became half Ashkenazi and half Sephardi at this point. And they were willing to forgo the privilege of voting and of sitting in legislative. In other words, they're very happy with the status quo, with having a monarch, in the land. As I say, the main church would have been the Protestant church, the Dutch Reformed Church, but they weren't interfering with the Jewish lives. So what did they have any need for this revolution, this carrying on that's going to extremes in France? They're happy with their lives in Holland. We'll just leave it like that. But of course, a lot of the younger people, were so excited about this revolution, and especially the granting of equal rights to all mankind. So, they like that idea of political emancipation. I mean, the other Jews that were doing perfectly fine. So what do they need this for? They didn't see any reason for it. Okay, that's what's going on in Holland. And now we'll talk a little bit about the citizens of Rome. Now, there are Jewish people living throughout Italy at this point. I wouldn't say it's a huge population, but they're definitely, and they have a very beautiful and rich tradition, Italian Jews. And actually, some of those Portuguese Jews, when they were first leaving Portugal, they settled in Italy. I think Shaw, last time when he spoke last year, he, which town? I think it's like northwestern, near Milan. There was a very prominent Jewish of these Portuguese Jews, and some of them then uh, moved to London, years later. Meanwhile, Italy is a Catholic country, but it's divided up into many, many divisions. So depending on where you live in Italy, things might be good for you, not so good. You would migrate from one area to the other. And of course, then there are the papal states where the Pope is in charge, but he viewed the Jews as the Pope's Jews. So it's not like they could not practice their Judaism, living in the papal states. They could, at listen, wherever circumstance you find yourself, you just accept it, right? As long as they're not trying to kill me, So they did, and they had decent lives. I mean, relatively decent lives. But let's just talk about those living in Rome. Now, the 18th century was not a good time for the Jews living in Rome. I'll just read this to you. It says compulsory attendance at sermons aimed to convert them. Kidnapping of children. You ever read that? Very moving. It's from the 19th century, early 20th, right? The kidnapping of Gardo. Yeah, right. Yeah, fascinating. Just fascinating. And this was going more into modern times. Kidnapping Jewish children. Unbelievable. Sometimes they would even adults, and they would force them to become Christians. I'm talking about here, obviously, this Catholics, right? Um, okay. There are also obviously restrictions on their social lives or some of their economic things. And of course, heavy taxation, part and parcel, so they treat us. Uh, so it was not exactly a very lovely place to live at that point. But in 1775, remember 1776, the American Revolution, 1775, Pope Pius VI issued a bull. That's like a proclamation, law, changing law, in which he emphasized and reinforced all the restrictions on the Jews. Thank you very much, Pius. And this was part of his plan to suppress the spirit of liberalism, which was then sweeping throughout Western Europe. We've got to squelch. We can't go around granting these Jews any equal, whether or not really rights in Italy at that point. In any case, you'll see things will change with Napoleon. Very interesting. Um, so in January 1793, there was actually an attempted revolution in Italy. Now, I'm not saying the Jews were leading this, but other non-Jews. But enough, they were tired of the church being telling them what to do. So, but unfortunately, this religious fervor put down. And the mob attacked the ghetto on the ground that hostility to the old order was rooted there. I mean, we're blamed no matter what. I remember when I first learned, how the Jews were looking. Either we were the capitalists, you know, uh, so, so a lot of prejudice arose because or we were the communists. I mean, well, which is it? I mean, they're two diametrically opposed, economic philosophies. You can't blame us for both things, but we were. I mean, Romans. Things will change for a little while in Rome when the French armies came in 1798. They closed that part of Italy. So now the Jews decide who live in Rome. They were living in a ghetto. I don't know if you've ever been to Rome, and you can tour, where the ghetto area is. And they were forced to wear a Jewish badge, not the star per se, like Hitler's time, but some sort of a yellow thing indicating that they were Jews. So they decide to get rid of it. It's not right. But then the French were driven out of Rome by the soldiers of Naples. It's now going to be Naples, and other. And there were other reactionaries that came out of the other Italian cities as well. And then there was terrible rioting that ensued as a result of this. And the Jews had to pay heavy fines. Like, it's our fault. I mean, you're attacking us, and now we have to pay for the fact that we did this. And again, they were restricted to living just behind those ghetto walls. And things will change though with Napoleon. We'll find out, or at least temporarily, even with Napoleon. So next time, so we're going to shift before we leave the 18th century. I do want to shift and see what's going on in the Americas. So again, if Shalom can do it, as I say, he's really the expert in the field. Otherwise, I say I've learned so much from him and a lot of reading, so I can share with you some of the bit of information. Very good. Everyone should be well, stay healthy. I heard that there's a lot of COVID going around. I don't know, but no, not here. I think the one in Deerfield Beach, the Century Village Beach. This was I was doing Joel paper. I don't know where we heard it from. Somebody in the restaurant listening. Be well, really, be well, everybody. And Ms. Hashem, I'll see you next week. Okay. My great pleasure. Oh, right. I don't know why she ran all quite so many. But all right, she meant right, that's what they say, Jews. Right. And some in Paris. Right. So most of them, there were a lot of Western Sfardim in that southwestern area. Shalom can tell you even more about that. And then, of course, right. Well, they weren't really accepted so much. Yes, initially. So, listen, I'm basing this on what I, yeah, that is this 100% accurate? I can't tell you. How to say something. My great pleasure. Oh, enjoy. Unless they want to come here a lecture. I don't know, Shalom comes, that would be like something. Stuff. Oh, okay. In the morning? You have tickets? Oh, yeah, yeah. And that's far away. Yeah. All right. Take it easy. So good to see you. Hello, and how are you? Yes. Yeah, we were always blamed and then had to pay for it. Yeah. Oh, it's awful. Yeah, it's whatever. It's just shameful. What can I tell you? We, our lives are never 100% guaranteed. I think there's been a rise. I don't know. Rise of from here in the U.S. also. You know, I, I mean, I feel especially for those kids in college. Yes, yes. But you know what I learned from Sholem, which I had not known, because any books I had read about the Holocaust in Holland, it always talked more about the Nazi Jews who could come from Germany and etc. But half the population literally were these Sephardic Jews, and over 90%. It was a beautiful, beautiful, rich Jewish people, and all this they destroyed. No, very separate. Yeah, yeah. But I never knew that. Never. Yeah, right. Well, the highest is actually Lithuania, 95% of Lithuanian Jews. There's a lot of them in the forest, Ponari, outside of Vilna. But afterwards, yes, Holland did. Among the they lived sorry, let's see.
They usually pick it up on their way in.